We're talking about tonight shattered perspectives, right? And the architecture of a comeback. And so a lot of us are going through these different things right now. And until we, get our perspectives or until something gets shattered, we don't really understand how to, navigate our way out of it, out of a situation, right? So my question to us tonight is what do you do when everything you built collapses? It doesn't, I'm not talking about something that collapsed slowly, right? Not something that is predictable, but something that happened very suddenly, right? It happened violently and there was no warning that came with it. That's what I'm talking about tonight, right? Because most people, when that happens to them, they don't rebuild. They actually retreat. They quit. They said, "I'm done. This is it. I'm done. I'm not gonna go forward." And then they disappear for a while, and then maybe some things may happen in the course of their journey that they actually bounce back, right? And they decide to come back again, right? But today we're talking about something different. We're talking about how to reconstruct your life, your leadership, and your identity after it's been shattered, right? And so this is Shattered Perspective, the architecture of a comeback. I'm Dr. Rayon Walton, and you can call me the architect of resilient leadership, right? And if there's anyone in this room that knows about leadership or resilience, it's me, right? I actually wrote a book that talks about a lot of the issues that we encounter that exacerbates our resilience. Or from my dissertation work I did on project management resilience, right, and unexpected events. So that's the basis of the language and what we're talking about tonight, right? So if you're just joining, welcome in. You feel free to comment in the chat where you're coming from. If you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat as well, and I can answer those as we go throughout the podcast, right? And so I've spent over 25 plus years operating in two different worlds, right? You're probably thinking like, man, this guy is confused. He's operating in two different worlds. But when I say that, I'm talking about the structure and intensity, of being in the Marine Corps, right? I was in the Marine Corps for close to 20 years, and I took an early retirement. And then the complexity of when you transition from being in military service, right? And then now you're actually dealing with civilians. Now you are on the other side of the spectrum, or the other side of the coin, where now you have to navigate differently, right? You can't use the same structure that you were using when you were in the military. Now you have to pivot, right? You guys hear me use that word a lot, right? You pivot. Pull you. Let me see. What is it saying right here? All right. So pull your hair for a little bit, but then get back to work. All right. I'm not sure what that means, but okay. Right. Okay. Got you. Right. So I'm just looking at the comments in the comment section as well. Right. So those are the things we're talking about. So a lot of times when we're looking at it from the perspective of the structure and intensity of the military, and then now looking at it from the project management perspective, here's what I learned. So leadership isn't a title, it's a structure that either is going to hold under pressure or it's going to collapse when it's tested. And that's the key part, right? Because we really don't know what we're made of until we're being tested. So until we go through those hard times, until we go through the shattering, until we go through the breaking points, until we actually get tested, we're not going to know what kind of structure we have. And so if that structure doesn't collapse, then we're not going to really know what we're made of. And so I think that's what happens to a lot of us is we come into this thing thinking, oh, the echo just went away right now, thank you. Right? We come into this thing thinking like, oh, everything is going to be peaches and cream, and everything is just going to be smooth sailing, and things are going to be linear, and I don't have to worry about any bumps in the road or any ups and downs. I just have to just show up, and everything is going to fall in place, right? Without the consideration that there are going to be some things that's going to challenge us. And until we go through those challenges, until we go through those bumps and those bruises, we're never going to understand exactly what the structure is that we've built. Yeah, we may think we have a solid foundation, But until that thing is tested, if it doesn't go through trials and tribulations, if it doesn't go through some kind of shift, if it doesn't go through an earthquake, right? You don't, some people are build. That's why when they do build houses, um, they check for fault lines, right? So is there going to be an earthquake? Are you going to build your house on top of an earthquake, right? That's not a solid foundation, because once it starts shifting, you're going to really find out what resilience really is, right? Because you're going to start to see, like, wait a minute, the structure that I thought I have, it wasn't strong enough. And so now this is where we get into that phase of where we're going to have to start rebuilding, right? But the core idea is, there are three core ideas that I want to share with us tonight, right? And I want to share them with you because I can tell you this: it's kind of a framework of sorts, right? So I like to deal with things in architecture or a framework, because when you look at life in general, you've got to go through a lot of different things, right? And you can look at it from many different perspectives, because we are all leaders of some sort, right? Whether we're a parent, whether we're you know um, a teacher, wherever we find ourselves where we're influencing other people, we fall in that leadership category. So, do we fall in the category of a good leader or a bad leader? That's really up to you, right? You have to make a determination, and the people around you also have to make that determination to help you, determine whether or not you're a good leader or not. Because you will know, right? Unless the echo chamber is like really loud, if you're not humble enough to be able to receive, I'm not sure where I'm going with this, right? But if you're not humble enough to be able to receive, constructive feedback, or any kind of criticism, then you really have to start to question what kind of leader we really are, right? So we're gonna pin that one, right? But most people treat leadership like motivation, right? I treat it like engineering, because when the chaos hits, that's when the motivation starts to disappear, right? This is where you get into that mindset where you're starting to think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done this, right? Or you publish the book, and then everything just seems like it was fine until you get to a maybe 2 years down the road, and then they're telling you, oh, wait a minute, we created the website for you, but we own the rights to it, and in order for you to extend, I'm just kind of I'm letting off some stuff here, right? But that's what I'm talking about. Then the motivation starts to disappear, because you're like, wait a minute, I put all this hard work into something, and then now all of a sudden it feels like it's starting to slip away, right? But we've got to understand, even in the midst of that, what remains is structure. You actually already built something. There's something that's already there that you can go off of, right? That's why a lot of people, when they say, you bounce back or you bounce forward, right? Resilience is exactly that. You don't necessarily have to start from scratch, right? And there are some times where you have to, right? I know, driving down the street to get to my house, there was a house on the left hand side of the street that was completely burnt down. It's actually connected to it's a condo, so it was a townhouse. So there was a house that was right next to it, right? And so that house that was connected got burned up, like it was a total loss, right? And it even start, and what ended up happening is that was a negative situation that was happening. And this is why your proximity to people, you have to be very careful, because that negativity that's there is going to start to, right? It's going to start to feed in. And so what happened is that blaze that was happening on one side of the building started to seep into the other building, where it started to catch that portion of the building on fire as well, right? So proximity, you got to think about that too. I'm just throwing out that nugget there. But essentially, what ended up happening is that house was a total loss. So they ended up having to sever that house away from the other houses, right? This was after the fact, because first of all, it was an eyesore. And then it's structurally, right? We're talking about structure. Structurally, it's probably not going to be a good idea to keep that house in the state that it's in, because the foundation, everything that was built on that has now been shattered. And so now we've got to really consider, what exactly are we doing? Are we building from scratch, or are we building from something that is, maybe there's something that remains and you can continue to build on that, right? You don't have to necessarily start from scratch unless that situation happened to you, right? So total loss, they're going to have to rebuild that thing. But I strongly believe that the foundation is still there. right? There may be some structural things that they might need to do to make sure that it is a solid foundation, but they already have something that's there that they can build on, right? And so everything that we go through, we have to start asking us that question because the structure still remains. But what have we built our leadership on? What have we built our business on? What have we built the thing that we're trying to execute? What have we done in order to get that foundation solid? Was it built on a solid foundation? I'll use it myself as an example, right? I'm so used to wanting to get things done, rush, 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 right? And it's always towards the end where I'm getting ready to execute that where I have the most challenge, right? Case in point, getting on this podcast tonight. I set everything up right. I had my virtual assistant helping me and telling me what to do and how to set things up. But the way they told me to structure the live was they wanted me to use a platform like OBS or something outside of using my webcam on my computer. And so I was like, wait a minute, it says to do that because I have better, bandwidth or whatever it was that they recommended, right? But I was used to just going ahead and just setting it up to where I just go straight to the webcam, right? But I was like, okay, I tried something different, and then I ended up starting late because I had to navigate through the changes, right? The things that took place right before I was getting ready. So my expectations were shattered because I was like, I'm a punctual person. I'm gonna start at 6:30. But see, this was a life lesson for me because I would have gotten frustrated and just quit and say, you know what, I'm just not even going to do this podcast tonight, right? But I strongly believe that that's when you really need to push yourself to do it because there's someone on the outside looking in or someone who will see this replay that's going to be encouraged by what I've said, right? Any information that comes through this podcast that may be move the needle for someone. And so that's why we have to understand what true resilience is, right? So if you're a leader, if you're an individual, if you're a human being, right, you need these three things. You need to have clarity. What exactly are you trying to do, right? What are you actually here to do? What is it that you want to accomplish? If we don't have the clarity on that, then we're never going to be able to move forward. We're not going to be able to go from the, point A to point B if we don't make that clear. What ends up happening sometimes is we rush things, right? Like in writing my book, and I'll talk to you guys a little bit about the book here in a few minutes, right? But I wanted, like, you can ask my wife, I wanted to get this thing out of me because I just wanted to publish the book. And I rushed and I made a lot of mistakes on the way, right? A lot of monetary mistakes, right? Like a lot of mistakes that cost me, quite a pretty penny, right? And hindsight is 2020 because looking back at that, I learned so much from those mistakes that in my next books that I'm going to be publishing, yes, I say books because there's going to be multiple books that I'm going to be publishing soon. I realized that I could have done a lot of those things that, the publishing company did that I could have actually done on my own. But because I was trying to rush it through, I ended up paying a price, right? It was a very significant price too, right? But I strongly believe that I'm going to recoup that and then some because what's going to end up happening is the strategy that I'm using. We're going to talk a little bit more about that too, here in a few minutes, right? But you have to have that strategy. You have to have the discipline, right? Which is the other thing. You got to first have that clarity. What are you actually here to do? The second thing is how do you execute under pressure? The pressure was for me to get it published, published. Let's go, 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 right? And thousands of dollars later and a lot of mistakes, I was doing it under pressure, but I was not executing with a method of discipline. I was undisciplined in just trying to rush it out without getting the full picture, right? And then being led astray and then being overpriced and overcharged, and upcharged and upsold on different things, right? So we really have to consider those things. And the third portion of the framework is what keeps you standing when things break. So I could have, when they gave me the message, right? They never gave me any kind of a notification. They didn't tell me, your website is going to expire. You've had 2 years. They didn't tell me that they own the website. Like I didn't know any of those things, right? Because I was the cloud of that dark cloud of just, I just want to get everything done. It just cluttered my mind. It cluttered my mindset. It cluttered everything. And I couldn't see straight in front of me. And so what ended up happening is, yeah, like I said, I paid the price, but now I'm dealing with this, and I was about to lose it on this person, right? Because they finally reached out and said, oh yeah, and I kept trying to get them to tell me where it was published, like how can I actually take the rights over, and it was a whole lot of debacle and rigmarole going on, right? But I said, you know what, I'm going to now make sure when I'm restructuring this thing, that I'm going to do it in a way where I'm going to take my time and I know it's going to be done right. Because the structure, now I have full clarity of what it is that I'm here to do. And then now I have an actual method. I don't have the pressure anymore that I put on myself before, right? So don't put that pressure on yourselves, right? Take that time, let it do it over a certain period of time. Eventually it's going to be established, and the timing is going to be perfect, right? And then the thing that's going to keep you standing. So when you go through this situation, are you going to just quit, or are you going to just say, okay, I have to now pivot and make another decision on how I'm actually going to move forward, right? So without those, you don't have leadership, you don't have anything, right? You have what's called instability. And so in the chat, it says experience, whether good or bad, is a lesson that hopefully we learn on the first time. Yes, absolutely. Right. So Michelle says, right, every experience, whether good or bad, is lesson learned, lesson that hopefully we learn on the first time. And so it was my first time publishing, a book, right? Like I published my dissertation. I had help. There were people of integrity, that helped me through that process, right? Because there were scholars, there were doctoral scholars as well, I became their peers, right? And that was interesting part too. That's for a whole nother segment here, right? But essentially, now that I've gotten through that, now I'm like, okay, what lesson have I learned in my first opportunity doing this? Now my second time around, I already know the pathway. I can cut out a whole lot of the steps that I had to go through, and I can start to move with the right strategy, right? So this is what I want to break down, right? So I'm going to break down this moment for you that I experienced, right? And like I said, I'm making this as real as possible, right? That was for me the major setback when they took the website down, right? So I don't have that website anymore. And it's like I call it a publishing scam essentially, right? Because it really threatened to dismantle everything that I built, right? And I spent a lot of time, energy, effort, and money to get everything done, right? Time, energy, vision, right? I just felt like it was gone, but it really wasn't completely gone, because I still had something to fall back on, right? Like I still had the physical book. It's still, everything is published on Amazon. I still have some of the content, right? So it was not a complete loss, right? I don't know if I'm still connected, but we'll see here. Let me see. Am I still connected? If I'm still connected, put yes in the chat, right? And so the if you put yes in the chat, then I'll know for sure that I'm still connected. Yeah, I don't know if I'm connected. Let's see. Hold on. All right, I think I am still connected. All right, I think I'm still connected, right? So essentially that's what it is, right? So I had to now, in the moment I had a choice. I either could collapse, or I could reconstruct, right? Because here's the truth: most people don't want to admit your philosophy means nothing until it gets tested, like I mentioned before, right? And so now I had to shift. I had to shift from that loss to rebuilding, right? So from loss to rebuild. So here's the comeback framework, right? So resilience is not about avoiding damage, right? I didn't think that I would have been going through this situation, right? I didn't know damage was going to be coming, right? Because in all truth and fact, they were supposed to do a whole lot of things with that website, and they didn't do anything, right? They said they were going to do all this, marketing and all this stuff. I paid for a marketing package. None of that happened, right? They put me on Facebook. They did all this other stuff, right? It looked like it was working, but nothing was happening, right? But so we have to get in our mindset that resilience doesn't mean we avoid the structural damage, right, from the fire. We don't get to avoid those things. Those are things that are actually going to show up, but it's about the intentional reconstruction, right? So here's the shift I made. Instead of asking, why did this happen to me, right? And that's the fallback question that we all go to. Why did this happen to me? Why couldn't it have happen to somebody else, right? Now I actually have a story to tell, and that's what as I'm developing as a storyteller, I start to understand, like, if I want to be a storyteller, right, I have to go through something to be able to tell that story so that people can connect, right? Because if your story is not connecting with someone else, it's not resonating, which means it's not landing. And that is a detriment to anything that you're proposing, because people are going to connect to you based off of emotion, based off what you've gone through, right? I'm going into like storytelling 101, right? But that's what it is. We have to be able to, if I didn't go through that experience, I would not have had a story, right? So we start to ask ourselves the question, why did this happen? Why me, God? Like, I did all this work. I'm a child of God. I shouldn't be going through this, right? All the more reason why. So that way he can prove you, right? And so now we have to transition the mindset and the perspective. Yeah, we got shattered, but what must I do to build now, or to rebuild, that could not exist before this? Here's the key to this, right? That's where everything changed for me, because now I'm like, okay, wait a minute, I just changed the whole spectrum here. What I did was, now I have full control. I can create my own website. I can do any whatever it is that I want. I can market the product, however I want it to be, right? I don't have to rely on someone else to do this, to continue draining me essentially, right? Which is what they were trying to do, even to the last moment, right? So now the reconstruction looks differently, because now it looks different now because I can do intentional reconstruction, right? Because what they actually did me a huge favor, right? Because that setback didn't actually destroy me. It exposed weak architecture, right? It was like, wait a minute, you thought you built something solid, right? And for a long time I did, for almost 2 years, until they came and just pulled the rug from under me, right? And so that's a part of life. So here's the actionable structure. I want you to think about this, right? If you're rebuilding right now, write this down, right? So if you're watching the replay, if you're seeing this somewhere on another, social media platform, right? This is your comeback architecture model, or the CAM, right? You want to first audit the collapse, right? You want to find out what actually failed, right? So the thing for me that failed in this scenario is, I didn't have control of my website. I didn't have any control. I have the rights to everything else but the website. And so that's where they were able to make sure that they were going to continuously pull from my resources, right? And I didn't see that. That was a blinder for me, right? So you audit that. So I audited that. Boom, I got it done. I already know now. Where were you vulnerable? Where was I vulnerable? I was very vulnerable because, number one, I was eager. I was open, and they saw that, right? They took advantage of my vulnerabilities, right? So now that I have full control of that, there's no way I'm going to be vulnerable, because I understand the full steps of exactly what I need to do. The same things that they were doing, I can now do it on my own. I have the full control, right? Then the second thing you want to do is, you want to strip to the foundation, right? So just like I said with that fire, right, that burnt that house down, strip to the foundation and find out what still stands. Yes, there may still be foundation there, right? And then you start to rebuild on that, or you start to fix the things about the foundation that is not going to be strong enough to withstand what you're about to rebuild. And so you got to also find out what is non-negotiable. What are your non-negotiables, right? I'm not going to falter. One of my non-negotiables is, I'm not rushing anything. I'm not going to be in such a rush to where I start to make mistakes again, or fall into a trap, right? And then the redesign, right? The third thing you want to do is, you want to redesign with clarity. So I started to rebuild my website, right? Like, I first started off on one platform, that didn't work out. I was like, I don't want to use that. Then I started doing research. Then I was on social media finding these different things, right? Right? Second thing, strip to the foundation. Yes, we got our scholars in the chat, right? And so you got to start redesigning with clarity, right? What does the new structure require? It requires clarity, right? I want to be able to say, this is what I stand for. This is what, people are going to understand about me when they look in on my website. They want to see about me, like everything that they need to know about me, right, is going to be in the about the author section, right? That, not that I didn't have that before, but now I get to tailor it and I get to market it in the right way. It's not going to be done like generic, it's going to be real, right? And that's a non-negotiable for me because I want to make sure that whatever it is that I'm portraying, that is actually going to be used to help other people. Like I always tell people, even if I'm reaching one person, it's mission accomplished for me, right? Because that's telling me something, right? That there is value in what it is that I'm presenting, right? Third is design with clarity, right? So those of you that are just joining, I appreciate you for stopping in. You could just, say hi and where you're from in the chat, right? No pressure, right? Just saying here. I saw someone else got it, right? So think about that, right? What does the new structure require? It requires something that's going to be solid. No one can pull the rug, from under you, right? The fourth thing you do is you want to rebuild with discipline, not emotion, not emergent, not urgency, but precision. So like I said before, I wanted to just like rush, rush, rush and get it done, right? Because I'm like, I don't know how much time I have left, right? But it's like we need to slow down and take our time, right? Design with clarity, right? We have to really just slow down. A lot of, and especially social media, right? They put a lot of pressure on us, right? One of the social medias that I was on, and you have to get to 10K before you can get into a certain program, right? And I'm like, man, well, that's it. I'm gonna do this because I want to monetize, right? And that's what we do. We find ourselves in that trap, and we start to do execute, in a rush, and then that's where we make the mistakes. That's where we get scammed. That's where we get into, people frauding us, or just making wrong decisions because we're so emotionally invested in this thing that we can't see with clarity. We can't use proper judgment to make a decision, right? So no urgency and just make sure you're doing it with precision, right? The fifth thing you want to do is never let the same failure happen twice, right? Like my wife was in the comments saying that, right? Hopefully we make the mistake once. But the thing that we do is, and this is one of the things that when I was studying on resilience, is that we focused on my research focused on three concepts, right? Three theoretical concepts: anticipating, coping, right? And I can't remember the third one, but it'll come back to me, right? Right? So essentially, you want to anticipate, what can actually happen in as you're dealing with resilience. What could go wrong. We have to consider those things, right? Because we can't just have our, head in the clouds, high in the sky, and everything is hunky dory, and without considering the what ifs, right? I'm not saying to what if things to death, right? But we got to really start considering. Wait a minute, what are the things? What are the risks, right? Anticipating, coping, and adapting. Thank you, Holy Spirit. Right? So anticipating and then coping as you're in it right now, right? What are you actually doing? Are you coping with the fact that, hey, they took my website down, right? And they want, oh, upwards of $3,000, 4,000, to run the website again, right? When I'm like, I'm pretty sure I could create a website for way less than that, right? But that's what they try to do. They upsell you on everything, and then they try to promise you all these different things, and they never deliver. So you're in the phase of coping with it. Okay, now it happened. What do I do next? Right? And then adapting. So this is where your lessons learned come into focus, right? Now that you went through the experience, maybe you didn't anticipate it. Okay, so what? You didn't anticipate it because now you're going to go through a cycle. You're coping with it now, right? Coping and adapting, right? So you're coping, right? Anticipating, coping, and adapting. So you're coping with it, the situation right now, because you have no other choice. You're like, okay, I'm in it. What do I do next? And adapting is like the lessons learned. What did you learn from the mistake? And how can you apply that in the next go around? So when my next go around I'm going to anticipate that there could be some things that, maybe not at the same magnitude that happened previously, but now I'm going to start considering, okay, what is my strategy for if something goes wrong? Not if, but when something goes wrong, right? Because it will go wrong, and we have to be able to accept that. We've got to get into that mindset of thinking, I'm not necessarily focusing on what can go wrong, but I'm understanding that the foundation and the structure has to be built strong enough for me to be able to withstand what does come, right? So this is how you rebuild as a leader, as an individual, right? Not emotionally, but architecturally, right? we're getting ready to wrap things up here. I'm gonna do a rapid fire right now, right? So let's go a little bit deeper here, really quick, before we wrap things up, right? So let's talk about the human and the spiritual dimensions. A lot of times we think that we're one dimensional beings, right? We're not, right? Mind, body, soul, spirit, right? Like there's multi we are multifaceted, multi-dimensional beings. And so leadership is not just operational. It's spiritual, it's emotional, it's deeply human, right? There we feel, right? We go through emotions, right? And so I'm gonna pivot here and demonstrate to you, the culmination of all these things, right? They couldn't take this away from me. They couldn't take this away from me. You know why? Because it was already published. It was already published, right? And that's why in this book, right, called Caught Up in the Rapture, I actually explore all of the emotions and the things that I've been talking about, right? I know there's kind of a delay. I don't know if we, because I'm looking at my other screen here. Um, I don't know if you guys can even see that. I'm showing the book right now. There's really a serious lag, right? But that's why this book explores loss, transition, and reconnection. Because whether you're leading a team or you're navigating your own life, you're always dealing with meaning, right? You're always dealing with meaning. So, get your copy. The link is in the bio. But I wanted to demonstrate that, right? Because there's still something that was left. It didn't get shattered. The book was already published, right? They couldn't take anything from me because it's in digital format, right? It's already published on Amazon. And so I wanted to use this opportunity to show us that we don't have to necessarily go back and start from scratch, right? Some things, if we've learned the lesson, we can actually just take what we have left and we can rebuild on that, right? And it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're building a team, if you're leading a team, or if you're navigating your own life, you're always going to be dealing with meaning, right? So here's my challenge to you, right? So stop trying to survive your setbacks, right? A lot of the survival of the setback looks like this, right? You're replaying all the sad songs, right? You're like, oh, woe is me. I wish they took advantage of me. If I would have done it this way, and if I would have, and we're singing the blues, right? And so this is what we're surviving. We're going through the motions, right? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't go through that, right? Because I went through that, right? And I was like, man, I just wish I could just go find these people and just have a good time, right? Like I like, and I'm like threatening to do all these things on. I'm like, you know what? Wait a minute. Let's take a step back. You learned this, right? Now you can go teach other people. This had to happen for a reason because a lot of people are gonna fall into this trap, right? And so if they can hear what I'm talking about here on this podcast, then they're gonna be able to say, oh, wait a minute, yeah, I see now. He went through this. I don't have to go through the same thing, right? So stop trying to survive your setbacks and start designing or redesigning your comeback, right? That's what we got to think about. What are you going to do now, right? Like you still have some residue. There's some residual from the experience. What are you going to take with you from what you learned to rebuild and to redesign your comeback, right? So if this message resonates with you, join me live every evening at not every evening, but every Friday evening at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. Let's build your leadership blueprint together. And if you're ready to go deeper, experience the journey in my book called Caught Up in the Rapture, right? Because you're not defined by what broke you, you're defined by what you build next, right? The storm is not your enemy, it's the best test of your structure. I'm Dr. Rayon Walton, and it's time to build. I'll see you in the next